Hello again, my name is Rashid Shaw, and I'm a sophomore political science major with a minor in criminology. I'll be discussing the approach of St. Thomas Aquinas, a 13th century philosopher and theologian whose methods for proving God's existence is very different from Assailum's. And in our textbook, chapter 9, pages 148 to 156, Aquinas' 5 ways are presented as arguments based on impartial observations in the nature of the world around us. Aquinas does not rely solely on definition or pure reason. Instead, he offers 5 arguments known as the 5 ways that aim to demonstrate the existence of a necessary being, which he identifies as God. I will briefly explain each of these arguments. First, the argument from motion. Aquinas observes that everything in the natural world is in motion. However, nothing can move by itself. Everything that moves is set in motion by something else. If we follow this claim backwards, there must be a first mover that itself is unmoved. Aquinas concludes that this unmoved mover is God. Second, the argument of causality, also called the cause argument. According to Aquinas, every effect in the world has a cause, but if every cause had its own cause, we would face an infinite regress. Therefore, there must be a first cause that it is not itself caused by anything else. Aquinas identifies this uncaused cause as God. Third, we have the argument of contingency. Aquinas notes that every being in this world is contingent, meaning it might not have existed if everything were contingent. Then, at some point, nothing would exist. To avoid this paradox, there must be a necessary being, one that exists by its own nature and does not depend on anything else. Aquinas asserts that this necessary being is God. Fourth, there is an argument from degrees of perfection. In the world, we see things that are more and less good, true, or beautiful. The existence of such graduation implies that there is a maximum standard against which these qualities are measured. Aquinas argues that this absolute standard of perfection is God. Fifth, the argument from design, or the theological argument. Aquinas points out that the natural world exhibits orders and purpose just as a complexity of a watch implies the existence of a watchmaker. The intricate order of the universe implies an intelligent designer. Aquinas concludes that this designer is God. Aquinas' arguments are inductive in nature. Rather than starting from or with a definition of God, he begins with observations about the world and infers that the first cause or necessary being must exist. His approach is deeply rooted in impartial evidence and appeals to everyday experience, such as the observation that things are in motion on that cause have effects. This makes his argument accessible, even though they have been subject to modern scientific scrutiny and critiques. While Aquinas' 5 ways have been highly influential in natural theology and continue to be discussed today, they also face objections. For example, critics question why the first cause must necessarily be the personal God of classical theism. Moreover, modern scientific theories such as cosmology and evolutionary biology offer alternative explanations for the order we observe in a universe. In our textbook, Aquinas' 5 ways are presented alongside counter-arguments providing a balanced view of both their strengths and limitations. These discussions on pages 148 to 156 highlight how Aquinas sought to bridge the gap between faith and reason by grounding his argument in the observable world. To summarize my part, St. Thomas Aquinas uses 5 different impartial arguments, the arguments from motion, causality, contingency, degrees of perfection, and design, to build a cumulative case.
Hello, my name is Joshua Gordon. I'm a senior computer information systems major, military science minor from Chicago. And in this video, our group will explore 2 of the most influential arguments for God's existence: the St. Anselm's ontological argument and St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. Although both philosophers seek to establish that God exists, they take very different approaches. Today, I will introduce the topic and explain St. Anselm's famous ontological argument. St. Anselm an 11th century theologian and philosopher, is best known for his work Proslogion, which he presents in the ontological argument. In our textbook, in Chapter 8, Medieval Philosophy, on pages 142 to 147, Anselm's argument is notable for being purely a priori. It relies solely on reason and definition, rather than empirical observation. Anselm begins by defining God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. This definition is not a mere verbal trick. It is intended to capture the idea of the ultimate, most perfect being. Even if one does not believe in God, one can still conceive of such a being. Anselm's central claim is that if this greatest conceivable being only exists in our minds and not in reality, then we could conceive of something even greater, a being that exists both in mind and in reality. But that would contradict the very notion of the greatest. Therefore, by definition, God must exist in reality. To illustrate, imagine someone describing the perfect island, an island that has every conceivable excellent quality. If the island exists only as an idea, then one could argue that a greater island would be one that exists in reality. Anselm's argument, however, asserts that when it comes to God, the concept of perfection necessarily includes existence. In other words, if we define God as the most perfect being, then God's existence is implicit in that definition. Of course, this argument has sparked much debate. Critics like Guanilo, a contemporary of Anselm, pointed out that using similar reasoning, one could prove the existence of a perfect island, which seems crazy. Later, Immanuel Kant argued that the existence is not a predicate or a quality that makes a being greater. Despite such challenges, Anselm's argument remains a cornerstone of philosophical discussions on the nature of God and the limits of pure reason. It is important to note that Anselm's approach is entirely deductive. He starts with a definition and reasons logically to a necessary conclusion. Our textbook provides an in-depth analysis of this argument on pages 142 through 147, outlining both its strengths and the challenges it has faced over centuries. Anselm's work set the stage for later debates by showing that the very concept of a supremely perfect being might require that such a being actually exists. In summary, St. Anselm argues that if we define God as the greatest conceivable being, then God must exist in reality because a being that exists is greater than one that exists only in the mind. While elegant, this argument has not gone without criticism, and in the next section, my colleague Raishi Shah will introduce St. Thomas Aquinas and explain how his approach differs from Anselm's. Let's now turn our attention to Aquinas' perspective on how proving God's existence.
Hello, my name is Malia Andrews, and I am a junior criminology major from Camden, New Jersey. In this section, I will compare and contrast the two approaches we just discussed. Although St. Anselm and St. Thomas Aquinas aim to demonstrate the existence of God, their methods, assumptions, and implications differ in significant ways. To begin with, both philosophers agree on one point, that God is necessary in being and that ultimate foundation of all existence. They also share the conviction that reason plays a central role in coming to understanding of the divine. However, their starting points are quite different. St. Anselm's ontological argument is purely deductive, a priori argument. Anselm begins with the concept of God as that than which nothing greater can be convinced, and that reason that if God existed only as an idea, a greater being could be conceived. namely one that exists in reality. Therefore, by definition, God must exist. His argument relies solely on the definition and the logic inherited in them. And in our textbook, the argument is presented as an example of how abstract reason can, in theory, lead to a conclusion about existence on pages 142 to 147. In contrast, St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways are based on observations of the natural world. Aquinas looks at every phenomenon such as motion, causality, and the apparent order in nature to infer the existence of a first cause or necessary being. This method is much closer to what we might call scientific reasoning. Aquinas' approach is detailed in pages 148 to 156 and emphasizes that empirical evidence supports the conclusion that there is something beyond observable world that initiates and sustains all existences. Another difference lies in the vulnerability to criticism. Anselm's argument has been famously critiqued by figures such as Guanello, who agreed that one could prove the existence of a perfect island by similar reasoning. Later, Kant famously argued that existence is not a predicate, meaning that simply defining something into existence does not guarantee its reality. Aquinas' 5 ways will, robust in their empirical bias, face challenges from modern science. For instance, the first cause argument is sometimes countered by questions such as why must the chain of concausation unlimitedly lead to a personal God rather than an abstract first principle. Additionally, the design argument has been challenged by evolutionary theory, which explains natural order without invoking an intelligent design. Despite these criticisms, both Anselm and Aquinas have left an enduring legacy in the history of philosophy and theology. Their arguments force us to consider the roles of reason and observation in our quest for truth. While Anselm's approach might appeal more to those who value pure logical deduction, Aquinas' argument resonates with those who see the natural world as evidence of a transcendent cause. In essence, the debate between these two methods represent the broader physiological tension between rationalism and empiricalism, a tension that continues to share contemporary discussions about faith, reason, and science. Both arguments have significantly influenced how later thinkers approach the question of God's existence, as highlighted in our textbook. To conclude this section, both Anselm and Aquinas use very different methods, one based on abstract reason and the other on empirical observation. Both strive to establish that God is not only conceivable but also necessarily real. Their approaches provide us with two commentarical perspectives, one on one of the most profound questions of existence.
Hello everyone, my name is Audrey Nelson. I am a junior economics major, biology minor from Westwood, New Jersey, and I will now wrap up our presentation by examining the criticisms of both St. Anselm's and St. Thomas Aquinas' arguments, reflecting on their broader implications and offering our conclusions. Pages 210 to 213 provided a rich discussion of these critiques, and I will reference specific points from it as I speak. Starting with St. Anselm's ontological argument. One of his earliest, most famous criticisms comes from the Guanilla of Montmartres. I am unable to pronounce that properly. Guanilla argued that if Anselm's reasonings were valid, one can define a perfect island and thereby prove that such island must exist. This objection demonstrates that merely defining something as the greatest does not ensure its existence. Later, Immanuel Kant advanced another major criticism by asserting that existence is not a predicate, but a quality that adds to the concept of a thing. In other words, adding exist to a concept does not enhance its greatness. Kant's critique remains one of the strongest objections to the ontological argument. Turning now to Aquinas' 5 ways, these arguments too face challenges. A frequent objection to the first cause argument is the problem of infinite regress. If every effect has its cause, why should God be exempt from its rule? Aquinas responds by categorizing God as a necessary being who does not require a cause. However, many critics see this as a special pledging. Additionally, the argument from design has been contested by modern scientific theories, particularly evolutionary biology and cosmology, which offer a naturalistic explanation